WebTV was not a success. Compared to its ambitions, I think it's safe to say it was a failure. Growing up, I only knew it as one of many optional add-ons to Windows 98, seeming to promise some kind of blend of the computer world with TV. Cool, I thought. Computers and TV are like my two favorite things. What could possibly go wrong? But then when I tried it, it seemed to require hardware that neither I nor anyone I knew had, so I left it alone and promptly forgot about it for decades. I became vaguely aware over the years of WebTV as a Microsoft product that hadn't really gained a lot of traction, which certainly tracked with my own experience, but what is it really? Why didn't it take off? And can you still use it today? WebTV began in 1995, then an independent company, with a simple vision of getting internet content onto the humble TV. Today, this is common practice. Many people, myself included, pretty much exclusively use their TV to watch content delivered via the internet. In fact, nowadays it's hard to find TVs that aren't in some way connected to the internet. But back in the mid-90s, this was a brand new idea, and WebTV received considerable attention for being the first to ever attempt it. However, it's probably not quite what you think. If you remember anything from the internet in the mid-90s, you'll remember that high-quality video streaming was far from one of its strong points. I mean, it would take another 10 years before we even moved beyond 240p. Instead, what WebTV sought to bring to the TV was what the internet was primarily being used for at the time. Stuff like email, IRC chat, and browsing static web pages. You might already see the problem with this, but there was actually some logic to it. See, computers were still fairly expensive and intimidating monoliths in the mid-90s, particularly for older generations who hadn't grown up with them. There was an idea that by packaging up internet access into a friendly set-top box for your familiar old TV, you could get web content to people that otherwise might find it daunting. And at first, WebTV did actually gain some traction, achieving as many as 800,000 subscribers by May of 1999. But it didn't take long for the success to taper off. As you can imagine, TVs just aren't suited for these kinds of highly interactive tasks. Computers and smartphones work because they're right in front of your eyes, but people generally don't want to stare at dense amounts of text on the other side of the room. This is true even today, but especially back then when TVs maxed out at 480i and in many countries were stuck with blurry old composite. WebTV invested a lot of effort into getting text to be nicely readable on TVs at the time, and admittedly it does look pretty good, but as the 90s and 2000s wore on, computer monitors started supporting higher and higher resolutions, which websites were all too happy to take advantage of. Meanwhile, TVs would be predominantly stuck at standard definition for another decade. WebTV did its best to reformat websites so they'd fit without the user having to scroll left and right, but there was only so much they could do. 10 years later, the smartphone revolution would force most websites to redesign themselves to accommodate a wide variety of screen sizes, but WebTV was never popular enough to have that kind of influence. Still, Microsoft, who had long been looking for a way to insert themselves into the living room, was interested enough in WebTV to acquire them in 1997. With their resources, WebTV saw spec bumps, a later renaming to MSN TV, licensing deals with TV companies like Dish Network and DirecTV, and in Japan, even saw its services appear on the Sega Dreamcast of all things. But ultimately, the technology was just never compelling enough to become any more than a small niche and a footnote in internet history. Though the servers did manage to cling on until 2013, making for a respectable 17-year run since its initial launch in 1996. Microsoft would eventually find their much-coveted living room success in the form of the Xbox, which actually saw a lot of collaboration with the WebTV team, especially on the 360. So even if WebTV wasn't a revolutionary smash hit like they'd hoped, Microsoft did eventually get something from the acquisition. As for that feature in Windows 98, well, it turns out, despite the same branding and a very similar UI, it's only tangentially related. It's a TV viewing application if you have a compatible tuner card in your PC. You do get the same interactive TV listing as WebTV, but that's it. None of the chat rooms or message boards or anything like that. I guess the idea is it's like the same concept in reverse, turning an internet-capable device into a TV, but even so, I don't know if I would have tried lumping it in with WebTV. Either way, the WebTV, despite or perhaps partly because of its lack of success, has cemented itself as a fascination for a small niche of nerds. While the servers were still active, hackers managed to reverse engineer them and find a lot of hidden functionality, including an apparently unreleased port of Doom to the original WebTV Plus, as well as an API that could be used to modify or even delete accounts without needing any authorization. One guy even managed to remotely set people's boxes to dial 911 instead of their internet service provider, in what's been called the WebTV's first and only virus. He went to jail for that. But what if you wanted to try WebTV today? Well, that's exactly the question that Jarhead and the team at Redialed seek to answer. Redialed was not the first community-hosted WebTV server, but it is the first serious attempt at a publicly available, feature-complete revival of the service. project lead Jarhead first discovered WebTV through a forum thread from Mattman69, advertising his own self-hosted WebTV server. Jarhead was immediately fascinated by this obscure piece of old technology. He started playing around with Mattman69's server through the official WebTV simulator, intended for web developers back in the day to see how their websites would show up on a real WebTV. He and his friends explored, trying out the WebTV's various features, and in an ironic echo of the original servers, soon became mischievous and managed to hack into various parts of Mattman69's server. Mattman69 had never intended to run a publicly available service and eventually took his server offline, but still, Jarhead had become, in his words, unhealthily obsessed with the WebTV. Without a running server to play on anymore, he soon discovered a bare-bones open-source program called Miniserve, which had managed to re-implement a lot of WebTV's low-level protocol using knowledge reverse-engineered from the original servers, but most of the actual content was empty placeholders. It didn't take long before Jarhead started experimenting with it, seeing what he could get to show up on the WebTV and trying to restore its missing functionality. In the beginning, Jarhead didn't know anything about programming, but he learned as he went, and before he knew it, he was basically developing his own full-on WebTV server. Over time, everything from account registration to IRC chat rooms to the fancy page builder feature were implemented, all largely through trial and error, just sending things to the WebTV and seeing how it responded. Much of the user interface, which naturally is HTML, had to be recreated from scratch. Occasionally, some pages got captured in online archives, and some data like old TV listings were found cached on some WebTV's hard drives, all of which was instrumental to figuring out how they worked and accurately recreating them. It also helped that some people had recorded their WebTV boxes at the time, including this video of a digitized VHS tape someone recorded back in 1999. It's kind of amazing we can just watch stuff like this nowadays. A lot of attention was also paid to making the server as stable and error-tolerant as possible. A poorly coded WebTV server is capable of completely crashing WebTV boxes, but the whole point of the WebTV philosophy was that you could never break anything by pushing the wrong button, so Redialed has made it their mission to achieve the same thing. It's all been a very grassroots project, with early betas being run on a humble Dell Optiplex in one of the team members' kitchens. But over the course of about a year and a half, it gradually became a fully functional WebTV server reimplementation, and saw an official launch in July 2023. Since then, all of its infrastructure has been fully open source, meaning you can technically self-host your very own fully featured WebTV server if you really wanted to. But if you just want to jump in, webtv.zone has all of the information you'll need. Redialed even supports ProtoWeb, a project that tries to faithfully restore the entire internet as close to what it was at the time, so you can get a feel for what it was like to actually use one of these all the way back in 1997. Is it worth trying out? Well, that depends. While there were a handful of games available, the WebTV is hardly a gaming powerhouse, and it's not like there's an enormous amount of content on it that you can't get anywhere else. However, it is a fascinating piece of history, an ultimately failed prediction of what the internet might look like one day from its very nascent years. I have to say, as ill-advised of a concept you could argue it was, the execution actually isn't bad. I was surprised, but for basic things like weather, news, and even the chat rooms, the UI is pretty intuitive. Indeed, there were older people who enjoyed the WebTV exactly as intended, a friendly and familiar means of accessing what was otherwise an intimidating World Wide Web. And this small but devoted audience is probably what kept it alive that whole time, even as the internet had theoretically long passed it by. I see the WebTV as kind of like the Philips CDI. Should you buy one? Well, if you're expecting to have a ton of fun with it, probably not. There's a reason these things never really caught on. But if you're interested in technological history, the stepping stones and near misses that brought us where we are today, then absolutely the WebTV is a very interesting one. And it's great to have revival projects like this that allow us to experience it as it originally was. Also, if you're a certain age, it's hard not to fall in love with the Y2K graphics, full of 3D gradients and technological optimism. With the WebTV simulators, you can get into it with fairly little upfront investment, though for the true experience you'll almost certainly want the real hardware, which, as of this video, is still pretty inexpensive to collect. Though considering the fact that the old WebTV boxes were fitted with only a dial-up modem, you'll also probably need to invest in something like a DreamPi, a Raspberry Pi app that emulates a dial-up connection, primarily to help get Dreamcasts back online. Dreamcasts that were also capable of connecting to WebTV. It really all comes full circle. Apart from ongoing maintenance, Redialed is now working on supporting the MSN TV2, the biggest and most significant of all the WebTV hardware revisions. The MSN TV2 is really a whole new system architecture, surprisingly similar to an original Xbox specs-wise, except technically even more PC-like. It also used entirely different back-end servers, meaning none of Redieled's current work is compatible with it. A lot of people feel the MSN TV2 isn't quite as special or interesting as the original, considering it's essentially a stripped-down PC, but for the purposes of preserving technological history, there are still people willing to make it work. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this look at an obscure product and the way the community is keeping it alive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye guys.